Hey Rockstars, Lid Shaw, and I'm here at NAMM 2020, believe it or not. I think you might have known that by this point. And I'm standing at the Spectra1964 booth with none other than Mr. Bill Cheney. How you doing, Bill?
I'm well, how are you?
Dude, it's great to see you here. Of course, we recently had you on the podcast, which was a whole lot of fun.
Right, that was a great time.
Yeah.
Great time.
Yeah, I think you said you were lucky enough to actually have some people come up here and say they had heard your interview.
Already, this morning, 10 o'clock.
Awesome, good deal. You never get a break, man. It's hard. It's hard to be famous, isn't it?
No, it's not that. I guarantee you.
Well, so you want to show off some of your wares here at the NAMM booth and see what we got? What kind of stuff are you showing?
Well, what we got this year is the new BBDI, which we talked about a little bit on the podcast, which is a ultra low distortion passive DI, and we designed it specifically to be used with our comp limiters, but we found that a lot of studio guys are using it for whatever. But it's ultra low distortion.
Yeah, and I like this. This has sort of like the bumpers on it or something too.
That was a later edition because we had a few people borrow them and drop them.
Yeah.
And so that was out of necessity. It wasn't style. It was survival. So we recently came up with those bumpers about a month and a half ago.
So what do you want to take this from me and show us what kind of connections we got on it? We'll get up close on it.
It's just going to be your 1/4-inch connectors with a looping in and out, and then a balanced XLR connector out. It's a real simple setup. It doesn't weigh much. But the big
ground switch too?
Lift ground switch on it. But it acts a lot like an active DI in bandwidth performance, and there's not much signal loss with it, so it does perform similar to an active, but doesn't have the issues that actives sometimes have, but very, very low distortion.
I feel like when I cut bass through this in the studio, it reminded me of a camera with a higher quality lens on it, where it just felt very transparent, like I wasn't used to hearing the bass quite sound like that.
Yeah, the mid-bass
sound real, very real.
Yeah, the comments we've heard, mid-bass, very articulate. It's not, doesn't mix things up in the mid-bass, and then above high frequency, like above 10 kilohertz, very clean and articulate, which is what you typically find in an active DI. But again, it's passive.
Awesome. Well, cool. And then what do we want to know about price point on those? Anything?
They're in a $300 range.
Okay, cool.
Maybe a little bit less than that.
Yeah. Well, that's great. You know, if you're going to have a DI around, you're going to cut bass, you really just want to make sure you've got one great DI, so you're always going to
One other thing that's happened with the implementation is, I don't know if you've used it for this yet, but keyboards. Right. They do something to keyboards, and I'm not sure exactly what it is, whether it's just buffering the output side of the keyboard amplifier or common mode rejection from a good transformer, but it really fattens up the sound. And it was never initially intended for that, but probably a third of our sales are keyboard players like B3s and that. They just love to use these with that box.
Very cool. And I believe they have Cinemag transformers inside or something?
It's a special made one. It's not off the shelf. And we've worked with Cinemag for going on 7 years, and this one was developed specifically for this box. It initially was designed for the 611.
Yeah, let's take a look at this too. What's the 611 all about here?
The 611 is initially was a guitar compressor, and but what happened was people started using them in front of their consoles as a limiter. It's a full comp limiter without the makeup gain, but it sets up like our 610s do. But it's just a limiter only and compressor only without makeup gain. But you can plug a guitar directly into this unit with a high impedance, 100K input impedance. So you can plug microphones into this, guitars. Very popular for tracking. And there was quite a few Grammy productions last year to use this on drum sessions as the mic pre-pre.
Very cool.
But again, the makeup gain is your console, where these have makeup gain in the traditional comp limiters. This is just this half of the comp limiter circuit.
We just plug a mic straight into this guy,
yes.
and it gets the input in, and it's going to handle the peak limiting as well on some of them?
Peak limiting, just like our more expensive boxes. It's the same board. It's just that it has a high impedance transformer rather than a low impedance transformer on our other device. So again, you can plug your guitar directly into it. Microphones, ribbons love it because it's high impedance.
Nice.
But people discovered as a mic pre-pre, and we were getting phone calls, but the earlier model had 6 dB pad, which was not enough to set the limiter properly. So that's why we went to a 32 position, so you can dial the limiter in properly.
Okay, cool. Do we want to talk about price point for people at all on this?
Under $1,000.
Under $1,000. All right, groovy. All right, and then so let's move on. Now we've got also the 500 series here. I'm familiar with this. The STX100 and the STX500 both sound totally amazing. Tell us what those are all about. We had talked about it on the podcast too.
Right. It's using this particular mic. This is the discrete pre we're so famous for. 1965, 1970 time frame.
That's the 101.
This is a 110.
110, right?
Now, a 101 and a 110 are similar. First 3/4 of the circuit, except for how the output stage is handled, but the sonic sound is very similar. This one likes the bipolar power supply of a 500 chassis much more readily than a 101, so that's why we use the 110. But this is that famous circuit that was designed in the 60s. That's part of this 500 series. Doesn't have any stability issues. These units don't draw any power to speak of. So where you hear in some 500 series, you got to be worried about power supply. These will not. A rack of these won't draw maybe 30% of what the power supply is rated for in this rack.
Right. So that means like if you thump a bass, if you hit a kick drum, if you hit a snare drum, and it's got that spike where it needs a whole lot of power for a moment, with these, with 8 of these in a rack, a lunchbox rack, it's not going to affect the sound of the other mic pre's. But with some traditional ones, it steals power from elsewhere and kind of kills things.
8 of these will draw less than 1/3 of an amp.
All right.
That's it. That's all it'll draw. So again, there's no inrush issues when you turn it on. And that's why we took a while to come out with a product was for 500, because we wanted to make sure that it sounded like our old desks and still affordable, but also deal with what's out there in terms of chassis, the different variables that come out with 500 series chassis.
Okay, cool. So with the STX100, we've got our phantom power switch, we got a phase flip or a polarity reverse, we've got our input setting and then our output setting. Now, do you want to explain to us how we're supposed to set this? You had talked to me about that before.
This goes for setting up any console or any input on a mic pre. The input, which is that knob on this device, so that's your dynamic range, that's your signal noise ratio. That is what's going to determine how good that recording is from that microphone or that source. If we don't pay attention to this, you're not going to recover what you've lost, the dynamic range. So what we did in this design is we're trying to make it for a less than 30-second setup. You turn the input up with your, let's say you have a microphone turn until this occasionally flashes.
Till this overload light or whatever. What is it? It says OVL. Yeah. That light flashes.
Right. Occasionally flashes. You've still got 4 dB of RMS headroom at that point. But that's the first thing you do on this box is turn this up to what it flashes. Then this is your second stage gain. That's where you set for the next device that you're terminated to.
Okay.
Do not reverse this. Don't turn this to 12 o'clock and then turn this up. It's a disaster. Okay. Turn this up till it flashes occasionally. At this point, when this flashes, you're almost at plus 20, so that's considerable level. But this is what you're going to match your next level to your next device. That's so important because again, you can't change that once it's been done.
Okay, cool. And then there's also a 10 dB pad switch here. So if it's a little too hot, we can pad it. I did notice it was a little different sound. One way will sound better than the other. With this.
Yeah, your levels. Yeah. Now we also have internally, and we're going to do a little video on it. There's a jumper. If you want this to be a 20 dB pad, it takes about 2 minutes to pop the side cover and change the jumper. So some people have opted for the 20 dB.
Okay, cool. And then tell us about the 500. So I guess physically it's not next to it in the rack, but the 500 works like it's meant to be right next to the 100 or something?
It's a totally passive device. It's from the original circuit design in 1966. The inductors, precision inductors, still uses the same precision switches they used, high quality switches, and it is essentially what they used at Stax, Ardent, Record Plant. It's that sound, and that's why we call it STX. So 2 of these mated together, you've got that particular input strip of those units. It's passive, so it doesn't draw any power, and it basically you take the side off the 100. It clips in, you tie the 2 together. It's about a 5-minute operation to piggyback it together.
All right, cool, man. That's awesome. Well, hopefully we still get enough time on this video. We can't do it for too long on Instagram, but tell us about the C610 and the V610 down here.
The C610 is the classic. This is our 50th year for this product. And so what we did was we reintroduced it. We made it look like the original 1969 model. Same internals, same 601 compressor limiter, same 101 makeup gain amplifier. We went back to the original knobs. We were noticing on eBay these things were getting ridiculously priced, so we came out with this. I mean, it was doubling the price just for the knobs. So this is, but our price isn't double for this one. But it's essentially the same 1969 version. And the thing to remember here is you can use this for microphone preamp, 2-bus in front of the DAW. You can use it in any part of the circuit. So this thing is not just to be used in one particular gain location. Many people track with this, many Grammy records. A lot of the tracking, the microphones have gone directly into these first. Then
you don't have to use a mic for you. You can actually plug a mic straight into this guy. And when we were cutting bass in the studio recently, we took my Music Man Stingray bass, went straight into the BBDI, out of that straight into this, and then dialed it in and sent that to tape, or not to tape, but to Pro Tools, and it sounded awesome. And you could definitely get bass sounds I could never get any other way. So tell us a little bit about like the basic setup for this too. How do you set the knobs when you're going to get a sound going?
Well, the easiest way to do it is to go to there's a YouTube video, Spectrasonics comp limiter, Spectrasonics 610. But essentially what you want to do when you start working with one of these things is have the compressor essentially turned off. And all you're going to do is bring the input up till the input occasionally flashes, and then you set your appropriate gain. You always learn these things first as a peak limiter only. As you bring the input up and the slope control is reversed, you can play with compression and you can play with release times at that point. But the most important thing to do is to start out as a limiter only. Listen to what you've achieved, because you'll be shocked at what happens just through the limiting function. I mean, you're going to hear things as they should sound.
Yeah, well, if Rockstars, if you want like a deep dive into that, go listen to the podcast episode. I'll put a link to it in the show notes, or the Instagram notes too. So we're going to, all the way to the right, all the way to the left, start bringing up the input till this light flashes, and then set your level to Pro Tools, then come back and start tweaking this slope back, and you're going to see the compression level go down more, right?
And typically where I tell people to start with the release time is right around 2 o'clock. And this is determined solely by how much low frequency, bass frequency is in the mix, and that'll change. So that's one of those things that there's mathematic formula in our manual. Don't look at that. Just do it by ear. You'll hear it when you have a slope problem, when you have a release time issue.
Nice. All right, cool. And then down below, how much different is this from this?
It's essentially the same box, except that it uses a 110 for makeup gain versus the 101. So this has an optimum output level of plus 16, this is plus 24. It's the same front end circuit, but we use high quality Swiss-made Elmas on all the positions. And this is really popular with the mastering folks because of recall and the accuracy. So
because it's stepped, right?
It's all stepped. Yeah. And there's over 100 metal film resistors just on the front substrate, just to control all of the different settings. But then you can recall with these precision switch values.
So it looks pretty cool when you're looking on the inside of that, is what you're saying.
Right.
We need some pictures of the inside of these if they look so cool.
I'll send you some.
All right, good. Well, cool. Well, thanks for showing us all this stuff, Bill.
Thank you very much.
Let the Rockstars know once again, like, where do they go check out Spectra1964?
Just that, Spectra1964, also on Instagram.
All right,
and Facebook also.
And a reminder, there's some great videos out there. People like Matt Rossbang, video you did with, who was it? It was somebody from Tape Op, right? Where you explained how to set this all up and everything.
Right. Yeah, Scott McCain. And then we had Pete Lyman, did a nice little stint for us. But we've been blessed to have people support us that are the leaders right now, so it's great.
Well, Bill, we're happy that you brought this back and we were able to use it. So thanks for watching this, Rockstars. We'll see you guys in the next video. Go check it out. Cheers.